Greetings from India. My name is Snigdha Basu and I will be moderating today's session. I'm associated with the current project of telling your story as an assistant and I am also a postgraduate in English literature. I welcome you to the stories of food and drinks shaping cultural identity and ideology curated under TMYS Review September 2022 in collaboration with the York Center for Asian Research, York University and Reader Mining. This evening, I consider myself very privileged to be in the company of our esteemed panelists, Harini Srinivasan, Sumedha Verma Ojha, and Rishiraj, who will shortly share their views and insights with us. The topic for today's discussion is tradition of alcohol consumption under the theme drinks in culture and culture of drinks. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our speakers first. Our first speaker for the session is Harini Srinivasan. Harini Srinivasan is an author, former civil servant, and an editorial and program management professional with experience in publishing, government, and e-learning. A published author, Harini Srinivasan has authored a children's book, The Visit Tales Adventures of Gungun, a historical detective fiction, The Curse of Anuganga, and several novellas like Death at Arcade Empuria, A Confusing Love Story, The Unintended Boyfriend Up Until Now. She is currently working on the second book in the historical detective fiction series and a non-fiction book. Honored to have you with us, ma'am. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Snigdha. Thank you telling me your story. Thank you, Coral. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sumedha ji. It's my pleasure to be on this extremely esteemed panel. I mean, just before this thing, I'm really thrilled to be on the panel with Sumedha ji, whom I really admire and appreciate as an author. So my pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, I,
Ma'am, before we begin the discussion, I'd like to introduce our speakers.
yeah, sure.
Our second speaker for the session is Sumedha Verma Ojha. Sumedha Verma Ojha is a Geneva-based ex-bureaucrat, historian, author, columnist, and web series maker, and the author of a Nuki series set in modern India. She is focused on a 360-degree understanding of ancient India based on Indic and Shastric epistemology, focusing on Sanskrit and Prakrit literature, the Mauryaans, and generations. Welcome, ma'am. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Snigdha. Thank you to all of you for giving us this opportunity to discuss this very interesting topic. And I hope all of us will bring our different perspectives. And I'm hoping to enjoy the next 1 hour very much.
Our third speaker is Rishiraj Pal. I'll introduce him once he joins us. So now we move on to the discussion forum. I'd like to request Harini ma'am to share her thoughts on the
Thank you, Snigdha. Uh, to start off on this topic, this was not a topic that I knew very much about, till I started researching. And while it might not be as extensive as Sumedha ji's or Rishiraj Pal's ji, but these are my little, views on this. Now, I think first time I started thinking about it was when I came across a reference to the drug and drink evil, which the problem which came I came about that in the Young India, which is basically a weekly paper that Mahatma Gandhi used to bring out. So this was one of the topics that was featured on it. So since his return to India, Mahatma Gandhi was basically touring the nation to identify all the problems and all the social issues that Indians were facing at that particular time. And drinking as an evil came up many times, and that is when I started thinking about when exactly it is. Now, if you really see, alcohol has been a part of Indian civilization or lives since antiquity. It was as much, alcohol was as much as an homegrown staple, essential as any other staple like wheat or rice or anything. We were probably among the first civilizations as such to discover the science of distillation. I think when I was reading up on the Harappan civilization some time back, I realized that this was, that they found several items, several clay items, potteries that indicated that Harappans knew the knowledge of distilling. But the earliest reference, I think, in literature that I came about, like, to any type of intoxicants was probably the Rig Veda. There are several passages which describe soma. Now, soma, the word, not only indicates this divine beverage, the beverage of the gods, but also the deity, the moon deity. So I think there were references where Indra, basically when he was fighting this demon Vrita, he consumed a lot of this soma, this intoxicant, and then he went into these, and then he went and fought the battle with Vrita. Now, the consumption of soma during sacrifices also during the Vedic period has been described. In fact, the preparation of this beverage has been described in the Rig Veda in in a lot of detail. Like, I think it comes from the plant called the somlata, and it is described in the Rig Veda where the soma was, this plant was basically plucked by the mountains in moonlight, and then it was carried in these carts, to this place where the sacrifice would take place, and then they would come up with all this. They would extract this juice, and this juice there was then mixed with milk, wheat, probably curds, and then they came up with this beverage, which was then consumed not only offered in the sacrificial fire, but also consumed by the priests and common people. So this, I think, so consumption of soma or the other beverages like alcohols, like such as sura or Parishruta, was very commonplace in the Vedic times. So much probably that it became a vice, because when we come to the later Vedic age, you suddenly see that consumption of alcohol was no longer, something that was encouraged. It was basically restricted only to these sacrificial or some kind of ceremony like that, and it was prohibited for general consumption. Now, again, in the Manusmriti, you find that there is a lot of reference to prohibition about how the king should not drink, the twice born should not consume alcohol. So somehow, somewhere, prohibition started entering at probably the later Vedic age or not. But till then, or for that matter, in the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, you or the Vishnu Purana, you have a lot of references to people consuming alcohol. For example, Balrama, the brother of Krishna, was very fond of his drink. There is this incident. I mean, there is a small anecdote where there is a demon. I think Vidipa was his name. When Balrama was sitting and enjoying his drink, which he was so fond of, this demon disturbed him, took the drink away in the form of a monkey, and he got so angry that he kind of killed it. In fact, a Sanskrit word for a particular beverage was actually called Haripriya, which is probably said to have been named after Balarama, because one of the epithets of Balarama was Haladhara. Then there is reference to Krishna also drinking, and in the Ramayana, I think there is a reference where when Hanuman goes to the city of Lanka looking for Sita, he comes across this entire hall of women. So where he is looking for Sita Mata in the interiors of the palace, and he finds a lot of women sleeping, and they were all intoxicated and drunk. So that way, there is a lot of reference to drinking and alcohol. The entire tradition of, there is a tradition of alcohol consumption. By the time we come to the Mauryan age, the Mauryan period, I think Sumedha ji will talk more about that. You do have references to alcohol. I think Kautilya Chanakya mentions the number of wines there were, the presence of the different types of liquors at that time. The Ramayana, I think, mentions four, whereas Chanakya mentions up to around 84 types of alcohol. Uh, my research has been limited mainly to the Gupta period. Now, in the Gupta period, of course, while thanks to the Jainism, the influences due to Jainism and Buddhism, vegetarianism was very much there, a part of lives. Alcohol consumption was very much there. Both men and women used to drink. And I think in the Gupta period, women had the first right to consume alcohol in a particular, social gathering. Now, Kalidasa's works, if you look at any of them, then you do have references to the uh, women consuming alcohol. Like in Malvika Agnimitra, one of King Agnimitra's wives, I think Ira Devi, she's described as being completely intoxicated. And I think Kalidasa's works, you come to know that there were at least in those days different types of alcohol. So as such, what I'm trying to say is, in ancient India, there were alcoholism. I mean, it was very prevalent, and people were okay with it. But at the same time, they were realizing the consequences and of too much drinking, which is why prohibition started coming in. This continued, I think, during the Mughal periods or this Delhi Sultanate periods, where despite the ban on drinking by Islam, you kind of it people still continued. Like Babar, in his Babar Nama, I think mentions that he does that he that while used to abstain, he also used to, you know, consume alcohol at many times. Talking of abstinence, one of the things that I came across, and which I think I was fascinated by, as you know, there is a story given as to why Brahmins do not should not drink alcohol, and I think that finds its root in the Shukracharya episode in the Mahabharata, where maybe not the Mahabharata, much before that, the Puranas, I think, when there was this war going on between Devas and the Asuras. And Acharya Brihaspati sends Kacha to kind of learn the Mrityu Sanjeevani mantra from Shukracharya. And this interesting story where he basically goes and tries to learn it, but then they kill him, the Asuras kill him, and Devyani, Kacha's wife, kind of asks her father to use the mantra to revive him. First, Shukracharya says, no need. I mean, there is no need to use that particular mantra, because after all, you know, he was probably destined to live just this much. But when his daughter continues to persist, he kind of revives him, and the next time they kind of chop him into pieces and mix the asuras chop Kacha into pieces and mix his pieces into Shukracharya's drink. And then when he drinks it, uh, to revive him, he teaches the mantra to Kacha, who is now in his stomach. And Kacha then kind of tears his stomach and kills him and comes out. But he revives Shukracharya, and Shukracharya is very, very angry, and he refuses, he kind of takes a vow of not to drink again. So maybe this could be the origin of why they say Brahmins should not drink it. So the abstinence part of started coming in from here. So essentially, my point is that alcohol consumption has been prevalent through the ages. It has become a vice. It has become a problem going forth. But but all the prohibition that came in, there's never been a complete prohibition as such. So the tradition has been there throughout. So these were my initial thoughts on this subject.
Thank you very much for the detailed observations, ma'am. We now move on to Harini, ma'am. I'd like to request you to share your thoughts on the topic. Over to you, ma'am.
Sorry, whose name did you take? Harini
Sumedha,
is
ma'am.
already finished.
Sumedha, ma'am.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Snigdha. Now, Harini has given us a kind of primer into a little bit of the origins of alcohol. I just fill in the picture a bit and give you a more, well, I'm a historian, so I'll give you some more historical detail. The word alcohol actually is a medieval one, which comes from alcohol, which means things which are made through sublimation. It's an Arabic word, and then it was adopted into general usage in the medieval ages. It is not very appropriate to be used in the context of India, because Harini talked about Som and Sura. Som and Sura are two different things. Som is distinguished from Sura. Som is something which is divine, which is encouraged, which has a certain ritual, historical, social, cultural, religious significance. And Sura is something completely different. And also the exact herb from which the Som was pressed has not been discovered as yet. So there are many candidates for it, including that the one that Harini mentioned. There are also certain mushrooms. There is also the American ridgewood. However, it is not indigenous to India. The algaric mushroom, the red algaric mushroom, at the moment is the greatest claimant. However, this question is far from settled. And som was actually pressed between stones. Those stones were placed over hollow ground. And when that was pressed, a certain sound was also created, which is supposed to be like bulls shouting. This som was then gathered on hide, and then it was pressed through sheep's wool. And this tawny, sparkling liquid was then mixed either with milk or curds or wheat flour and then consumed. It gave exhilaration beyond normal powers. So you heard the story of Indra and Vritra, and there are many such stories. The consumption of som was to give you great powers and you could function beyond yourself. It was a great favorite of our wonderful Vedic god Indra. There is an interesting story of Apala and Indra. Apala is a young woman, a teenager who wishes to attract Indra. So what does she do? She takes some stalks of the herb, puts it between her teeth, and grinds them. So that is supposed to be the grinding of som will always attract Indra. So Indra is attracted. She asks him for the boon of becoming beautiful because she had a skin disease which she wanted to get rid of. She asked for certain things for her family, and all of them were given to her by Indra. So there are so many stories associated with som and with Indra. In the later Vedic times, the herb became more and more rare. So then it was substituted with some things that we know even today: Arjun, Adar, Putika. These items were used to prepare the som in the later Vedic period when the actual herb, which we don't know the identity of, became more and more scarce. Now we have this different class of drinks called sura, and this sura is that which is associated with pleasure, with recreation, etc., etc. And it has a lot of it has a hoary history, as we've already heard from Harini. We have its mentions in the Rigved. The Rigved frowns on sura but does not ban it. It does not encourage anyone to drink sura. Som is a highly prestigious and prized beverage to drink. Sura is, not all that appreciated or encouraged. An important thing to note is that the distillation of sura was indeed known in the Harappan civilization. And I don't know whether is there any way to share my screen, Snigdha? Is there any
Um,
way? Because I'll show you the actual thing, the apparatus through which the Indus Valley civilization alcohol was made. Is there any way of
there is
sharing?
an option. There is an option to share your
Okay,
computer.
share screen. So let's see. Yes, here it is. So can you see something or not? Yes,
Yeah.
you can. Okay, so this you can get through a simple Wikipedia search of the Takshila Museum, because the oldest distillation apparatus is in the Takshila Museum, and this picture is from there. So you can see one pot. That pot had the item which you wanted to ferment. So, it used to be fermented rice, fermented barley, etc. It was put in that pot. A fire was burnt below it, and then it was heated up, and you see that inverted pot which fits into that water pot completely. It went up there, it was vaporized, and then it through that, can you see that little pipe which connects it to another little pot? The vapor traveled there, condensed over there, and it was collected over there in that little pot that you see. So this, and if you see on the right side of the screen, I don't know whether you can see my pointer. Here is a stylized description of it, which gives you a very clear description of what is happening. Look at this: the fire, the vaporization, and here is what you get. So many of these, this is perforated. This pot, this inverted pot is perforated, and many of these perforated pots were found. And in the beginning it was very difficult to understand what is it that was being done with this. But then when this particular distillation apparatus was found, there we go, now we knew what exactly was happening. So the Indus Valley civilization, there are we need not go into those details, but many of the descriptions in the Vedic corpus can be found in practice in the remains that we find in the Indus Valley or Saraswati Sindhu civilization. So in this one, for example, maybe rice and barley was being fermented, etc., etc. Lots of things. So what were the different things from which this surah was made, and what were the different ways in which it was flavored? Raw materials were rice, barley, fruits, flowers, then coconut sap, or you had honey, you had sugarcane. What were the fermenting agents which were used? So, a rice and different kinds of dal would be pound into a paste and left. So, you know that rice and dal ferment by themselves, and these would be used as fermenting agents. They were flavored with the juice of fruits, extract from flowers, lots of spices, long pepper, round pepper, nutmeg, cloves, cardamom. Then there were some astringents such as meshuringi, kapet, areca nut, triphala, etc. And I am not saying all these, I am not making it up. So these are sourced from a lot of these are sourced from the Arthashastra, which is actually perhaps the only composition or text which gives us the exact way in which to make so many of these different surahs. And I will talk to you about a couple of them because I have all in my books. Because I write about Ganika Shala, I write about dancing girls. There's a lot of alcohol, so I will tell you about some of them. So some of them were derived from grain, and others were derived from, for example, there was something called masar derived from barley and rice. There was something called kilal, which was derived from fermented cereals. Then you had kasher, which was fermented extract of rice and flowers. Prasanna is a very, very important, very, very popular one. Prasanna is fermented rice flour, which is flavored with a with different kinds of spices, and the Arthashastra gives a long description of these different flavors. There was something called Shvetasur, which was clarified prasanna. By adding sugar, that was clarified that drink, and it became Shvetasur. Now, I've been telling you about some of the Sanskrit compositions, but we find a lot of it in Sangam literature. Sangam literature, of course, is the third Sangam is supposed to be around the time of the Mauryan. So, you take, for example, the Purananuru. In the Purananuru, there's a great description of toddy. What was toddy made of? It was made of palmyra sap and nira sap. Toddy was then again distilled and it became arrack. Arrack was a great favorite with sailors, soldiers, etc. Then fermented rice grains, wine brewed from honey, all these are also mentioned in Sangam literature. So you see, again, there's a lot of alcohol from all parts of the country. And as we heard, four are mentioned in the Valmiki Ramayana, 12 types are mentioned in the Arthashastra, and 84 types are mentioned in the Charak Sanhita. I will tell you of the names of some, just it's a very, very complicated and huge corpus of names and methods. So we can just take a little taste of it. So I've told you about Kilal and I've told you about Masar. So there was something called Kashay, which was a fermented extract of rice meal and flowers. Then there was something which I really like, which is Mango Mahasur. So it was made of mango juice, mango liquor, and wine. There were also certain types of wines which are actually called madhu, and two of the most important imported ones were imported from Afghanistan. They were called Harahurak and Kapishayani, and very popular during the Mauryan period. So there's a lot of Harahurak drunk in my books, for instance. So there's like I said, the numbers are huge, and I don't think that talking about all the names will really convey a lot. But anyone who wants to know, you read this book. And Katie Achaya is a very, very good source for learning all about alcohol, actually all about food, but definitely all about alcohol. Now, so let's come, this is, what they were. Now, let's come to the social, cultural, administrative aspects, etc. If we look at the sweep of Indian history, the sweep of Indian history tells us that moderation was the key word. Liquor existed, alcohol existed, and it was drunk by people across the board, across everywhere. But what was prescribed by our cultural ethos and norms was moderation. For instance, the Rig Ved tells you, discourages you from drinking surah, but it doesn't ban it. It doesn't say don't drink it. As far as the differences were concerned, everyone could drink liquor except Brahmins and students. So students, brahmacharis, were not supposed to drink liquor. No matter from which caste they came, they were not supposed to drink liquor during the time of their studentship. Kshatriyas and Vaishyas were to drink non-grain liquors. So they were to drink uh, alcohol made of fruits, flowers, honey, etc., but not grain and cereal based liquor because that is much stronger. Then for the other castes, all types of grain liquor and whatever they wished they could drink. There is another aspect of alcohol which is important, which is the chikitsa aspect, the medicinal aspect, which is why we keep mentioning charak and sushrut in our discussion of alcohol. Again, what does Charak say? He doesn't say don't drink it. Alcohol increases pitta, which is the mental aspect, and decreases kapha and vata, which are the physical and vitality aspects. So you have to keep a balance between them. So they ask you to drink very little. Light wines can be enjoyed. Do not drink in summer and during the monsoon, but drink in spring and in the winter. So in the Charak Sanhita, in chapter 27 of the first book, which is called Sutrasthanam, it gives a list of the 84 types that we have been talking about, describes all of them. And the last shlok of that section tells you how to drink alcohol appropriately and how good it is if drunk appropriately. So here, moderation, appropriateness, both these are important. It's interesting to note that travel writers, those who have come to India across the ages, whether it be Megasthenes or whether it be Huyen Sang or anybody else who came later, or Masudi, they have all mentioned very particularly that Indians consume liquor but are not inebriated. They maintain a very moderate standard of drinking liquor. So, this, again, as I emphasize, is one of the key points as far as liquor is concerned. Now, I have to talk about the Mauryan period because that's where I situate myself. You can understand the importance of liquor in the Mauryan period because Sura Adhyaksha, or the Department of Alcohol, was one of the 33 departments of the Mauryans. And it was one of the most important revenue yielding departments. So it was a state monopoly. Making liquor was a state monopoly. Related is also is the Ganika Adhyaksha. The Ganika is the dancing girl. The Ganika Shala is the place where dancing girls and what you would perhaps today wrongly call prostitutes uh, entertain their customers. It was also a center where there was gambling and where there was drinking. So these two things were very strongly controlled by the Mauryan Empire. So except for festive occasions, householders could not make sura, but they could make medicinal arishts and asavs. When there was a festival, then for 4 days, anyone could take a license from the government and make it for 4 days and sell it and give a 5% duty back to the state. So remember, all through the year, it was a state monopoly. For 4 days around important festivals, people could make it and sell it and then give 5% of the proceeds to to the state. And if somebody just thought they would make it without taking a license, they were very, very heavily fined. Unauthorized transport of alcohol was prohibited from anywhere to anywhere. You were supposed to drink where? You were supposed to drink in panagars. These panagars were what you would call drinking houses or ale houses. And there is a beautiful description in the Arthashastra of how they should be made. They should have chairs, beds, different rooms. They should have lodgings, food, comfort, should be perfumed, decorated with flowers. So they should be indeed an attraction for people. And you could drink alcohol only in these panagars. So the Panagar was controlled by the Suradhyaksh. The Suradhyaksh had all the Sura made and also dissemination points, as in the authorized outlets where you could buy them, and also these Panagars where you could drink them. So you see that this Sura, gambling, and Ganikas, all of them went together. They were a kind of package, and this package was controlled very, very heavily by the Mauryan Mauryan state, because some other important things also happened over there. One was spying, both domestic and international. All this happened inside these panagars. So there is a description of how secret agents should be there. They should be looking at everyone, listening to everyone's conversation, reporting back. They also acted as security within the panagar. So if the person running that panagar tried to do some hanky panky and steal something, then these secret agents stopped them from doing that. So this is a description of drinking houses. What about parties? Did people drink at parties? Yes. There were three kinds of parties in ancient India. Samaj, Vihar, and Utsav. Utsav is festival parties. They are a separate thing. But in the Samaj and Vihar parties, these were huge spreads, either in your own home or in a public place. There were entertainers and there was a lot of alcohol. And there was, this was the recreation and this was the entertainment part of alcohol. There's another very important thing to remember, or another very important aspect, that is the theater tradition, which comes from the Natya Shastra. There are three theater traditions: Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiv tradition. Brahma tradition is of stages, the Rangashala. Vishnu tradition is the temple tradition of theater, and there is a Shiv tradition of theater. Now, Shiv is an Oghar. He is everywhere and nowhere. So the Shiv tradition of theater was performances in drinking houses. This was really grassroots. This was informal grassroots expression of aesthetics. So this Shiv tradition of theater is closely related to drinking and to drinking houses. So I think I've taken up quite a bit of time, although I would have liked to tell you a bit more about some ancillary aspects, but I think I'll end here. Maybe in the question and answer session, I can talk a bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for the insightful perspectives and the very detailed research. Uh, Now I'll move on to our third speaker. I'll first introduce him, then we can move on to listen to his insights on the topic. So our third speaker for the session is Rishiraj Pal. Rishiraj Pal is assistant professor in English at Ravindra Bharati University. He is also a doctoral candidate at the Department of English, Vishwa Bharati Shantiniketan. He has taught at both UG and PG levels in colleges affiliated to Calcutta University. He was also awarded full scholarships to attend James Joyce summer schools in Italy and Ireland. He has recently presented his research on James Joyce at various international symposiums held in Singapore, Rome, and Dublin. He is currently editing a volume on sexuality studies. Welcome, sir, and over to you now.
Thanks very much, Snigdha, for this generous introduction, and very good evening to all and my fellow speakers. It's been really wonderful listening to uh, Sumedha, Ojha, and Harini Srinivasan, and I'll have my brief talk now, and then we can take up any uh, further thing in the question answer session. Yeah, so since we are discussing alcohol and the tradition of alcohol consumption, uh, there are a great many substances that men have learned to ingest in order to get special bodily sensations. That's exactly what alcohol does. Of them all, alcohol is culturally the most important by far. That's why we are discussing alcohol. It was anciently the most widespread in use, the most widely valued as a ritual and societal artifact, the most deeply embedded in diverse cultures. Tribal people of all the major parts of the world knew the alcoholic drink. It was of considerable interest in the principal civilizations, in most of them from their early beginnings onwards. In some languages, as in English, the very term drink takes on the connotation of drinking alcoholic liquids. Give me a drink. It means by default an alcoholic drink. So, where alcohol is known, patterns for its use and for abstention are prescribed usually in fine detail. There have been very few, if any, societies whose people knew the use of alcohol and yet paid very little attention to it. And that's why alcohol may be tabooed, as we know, it is not ignored. Cultural practices in drinking range from avid immersion to total rejection, from avid immersion to a total rejection. We talk about the differences in culture. Now, I would like to talk about very briefly the similarities across cultures of drinking. Cultural variations in drinking practices are well documented, but there has been little notice of similarities in the use of alcohol across cultures. One such regularity is that drinking is usually considered more suitable for men than for women. It is commonly a social rather than a solitary activity, but it is done much more in the society of age mates and peers than with the elders or in the family circle. So again, there are various exceptions, as in France, where wine is being served as a part of lunch or dinners. I'm not talking about that, but in general, drinking together generally symbolizes durable social solidarity, or at least an amity among those who share a drink. Drinking is more often considered appropriate for those who grapple with the external environment than for those whose task is to carry on and maintain a society's internal activities. This distinction was anciently symbolized in India, and that's where I enter the, this particular discussion of uh, the two earlier speakers. By the difference, this distinction was anciently symbolized in India by the difference between the god Indra and Varuna. God Indra, the scourge of enemies, the thunderer, the rostra, the heavy drinker, and Varuna, the sober guardian of order and mortality. In ancient Greece, of course, uh, the worship of Dionysius could transport the worshipper into an extraordinary, even frenzied state. That of Apollo, on the other hand, encouraged social morality. The Greeks successfully combined the two by assigning certain functions and occasions to the one deity and the different jurisdiction and festivals to the other. Drinking was a prominent feature of the Dionysian rites, but not at the Apollonian ceremonies. In India, changes in alcohol use reflected the major changes in social structure. Drinking was done all by men in the early egalitarian period. Then, as the motif of hierarchy pervaded and stratified Indian society, drinking was accommodated to this social theme. Liquor was prohibited for certain castes and permitted for others, just, just as other social functions were specialized according to caste. Within very recent years, there has been a shift to a more egalitarian, although alcoholically less permissive social code. Now, under the law of several state governments of India, of the Republic of India, drinking is prohibited to all in those states. Now, the earliest Indian literary sources that my fellow speakers were discussing, the Vedic hymns make frequent mention of intoxicating liquors. One ritual drink was, of course, soma. Have that was being discussed, used only in sacrifices and described as having inebriating effects, although it may not have been alcoholic since it was pressed from the juice of a plant mixed with milk drunk on the same day. The sura, as discussed, was certainly alcoholic. It could be prepared from molasses or rice or possibly honey, perhaps. My fellow speakers would know uh, more than I do in this subject. Now, interestingly, later there came a change in the social meaning of strong drink in India. It was eliminated from the rituals of the high gods. It became polluting to those who sought to follow the edicts of scripture. The rise of Buddhism may have had some influence on this shift of Hindu religious practice, since early Buddhism discounted mere ritual, including the ritual use of alcohol. But alcoholic drinks were not prohibited for all society. The Code of Manu says only that the Brahmins should should totally abstain. Those of other strata of society did not. The Brahmins only. Those of other strata of society did not take any disgrace in drinking, but also could not attain For that and other reasons, a high state of religious purity. The question of the sacred and the profane comes here. Now, since the time of Manu, drinking has been socially and religiously compartmentalized in India. It is totally excluded from the worship of high universalistic gods and from the way of life of religiously purist people. Many Brahmin groups are strictly abstinent, and even among those Brahmin communities in which men may drink liquor occasionally, they must abstain from drink when they prepare to approach the high deities. Men of the Kshatriya, the warrior tradition, customarily drink heartily. Since this class provided most of the rulers and executive of the state, there was no thought of total prohibition under indigenous Indian princes than there was under the later regime of the British. Yet the Kshatriyas also acknowledge that high gods dislike alcohol, and they abstain when they seek to be in the state of ritual purity. Now, there is another set of deities, the local godlings who preside over local illness and misfortunes, whose ritual is carried on mainly by those of the lower caste, though all in the village society, high and low alike, may seek their intervention in personal aid. In the rituals of these deities, these uh, lower deities, as it were, liquor is often applied externally as libation, internally as invigorant. Thus, there has long been a rigid separation of alcoholic use in the Indian civilization. It was tabooed for those of gods, as being discussed. It was tabooed for those of gods and men who were immersed in cosmic concerns. The influence of drink in that sphere was considered disruptive for the whole universe of religion and society. But in the more parochial domain, for instance, for local blessings, for village solidarity, for personal benefits, strong drink was liberally used. Gandhi was strongly in the ascetic tradition, and when the political party that he led took over the government of the country, the ascetic mode was respected, the ascetic mode of not touching alcohol. Many of the political leaders held the belief that an independent India had to be a pure India, and one had to advance national purity was by legal prohibition. This seemed to be quite in the sacred tradition, but in fact, it was in one respect a radical departure from the ancient tradition of alcohol consumption. The Sanskritic tradition did not rule out alcohol for all in society, but only for the most spiritually elevated. Yet the recent statutes prohibit alcoholic drink absolutely for all who are within the territorial bounds of the state. Now, from the earliest recorded history, we find that the Dravidians knew the art of toddy tapping, while the Aryans used fermentation and distillation for preparing their alcoholic beverages. Among them, only the Kshatriyas, as I said, were enjoined not to partake of liquor prepared from cereals, and that only on festive occasions. The Jain and Buddhist religions, on the other hand, forbade the use of alcoholic drinks as well as meat in any form. Their influence was, however, geographically limited to the western and central parts of India. People in the north, as depicted in the epics, continued to be non vegetarians, and drinking was common, particularly among the Kshatriyas. In this context, a spirit of compromise may be detected in a verse from Manusmriti which states that there is no harm in eating meat or drinking intoxicating liquor, as it is the natural craving of man, but abstaining from them is meritorious. Abstaining from them is meritorious. That's the point. So during the Muslim period, we find an even greater divergence between the religious injunction and actual practice. Almost all the members of the ruling class and the military drank heavily. It is no wonder that the attempts to introduce prohibition by Alauddin Khilji and Jahangir proved a failure. There is, in fact, no definite cultural tradition in India which could be described as being clearly and unequivocally against the use of alcohol in any form and under any circumstance. Although alcohol is frequently referred to as an evil, it is at the same time socially accepted and glamorized by the use among the ruling classes. The attitude fits in with an ambivalent culture, I would argue, an ambivalent culture in which sternly negative and prohibitive attitudes coexist. Sternly negative and prohibitive attitudes coexist with attitudes actually idealizing intoxication, leading to a sort of battle between the ascetic moralists and, of course, as we know, the hedonists. As a result, the use of alcohol has never become integrated into the normal everyday life or social rituals in India. So that among those who drink, the amount of alcohol ingested tends to be large and intoxication regarded as a desirable condition. So these are my initial points, and then I would love to take up certain questions in the Q&A session. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the invaluable observations. You know,
Snigdha,
yeah,
Snigdha, could you just give me 1 minute? Rishiraj, I'm really sorry, but I would like to just point out that women were not stopped from drinking liquor in any Indian tradition.
Right.
Actually, in the past, women drank much more liquor than today's kind of peculiar attitudes towards women drinking
Oh
liquor. It
yes.
was absolutely accepted. And in fact, it
Right.
was very much, if you read, I write these books on the modern period. So
Right.
I do a lot of, my protagonist is a woman, and believe me,
Okay.
she drinks a lot of liquor. So that, I think, maybe if you go back to the past and check a bit
Right.
practices as well as theoretical things, you will find that women did drink liquor. And the other thing is also liquor not being offered to high gods. I don't really understand what high gods are, but liquor is
Okay.
offered to devis, and liquor is
Yes.
offered to Kal Bhairav. So the liquor
Right.
tradition and devotion is very much there. So I don't know. I hope that I did not disrupt anything by
No,
saying
no,
this, but I thought
no,
I
no.
would
Of
just
course
point
not.
it out.
Right. Of course not. I completely understand. What I was meaning is that I was trying to draw a binary between the Brahministic tradition and the Tantric tradition. So
Rishiraj, perhaps that is the
yeah.
binary I'm objecting to. That is
Okay.
exactly the
Okay. I
binary I'm
see. I
objecting
see.
to. Yes.
Right. Right.
So
Right. I see.
that binary does not seem to be clear either in practice or in precept.
I
But
see.
I
Okay.
don't know, maybe we should just go on to the session. So I apologize if I created some
No, 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 no.
disruption,
It's
but I
it's
thought it is
perfectly all
important to
right.
point these things out.
Right. There must have been a gap within this epistemic idea of these binaries, perhaps. Yes. Right. And
Thank
thanks for
you.
pointing that out. Yeah.
Thank you.
thank you. We now move on to the question and answer session. My first question is to Harini ma'am. So there is this general disparity in popular and religious narratives on Shiva's endorsement of intoxicants. Bhairav, he is offered alcohol in many temples in India like Kashi and Ojha. What could be the reason behind such disparity?
This is exactly what Sumedha ji was just pointing out too, So yeah, there is a tradition of offering liquor to Kal Bhairav and Shakti. I think this comes from the tantric lineage within Shaivism. So and Ujjain, from what I understand, was a center of the sect of these Aghora tantrics, and hence Kal Bhairav, who is kind of the Dwarpalik or Palak of the city, was appeased with this liquor, so that's the reason they kind of and that tradition is still continued today. So because in the tantric tradition, I think the prayer is through meat, madira, that's alcohol, and there is another third M which I'm forgetting. Sumedha ji, do you recall?
No.
Because I think there are three or four M's, words
Five,
starting with
five.
M.
Yeah.
Five M.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Months, meat.
Meat,
Yeah.
and then Madira, and just one second, let me look at my notes. if I have it here.
I know Ujjain also, Devi Mahamaya, she is also
Devi
offered
Mahamaya.
liquor.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because I think in a tantric sect of the 11th century, there's a reference to Shiva. I mean Shakti and Shiva being prayed. Offered both meat and liquor, and that's the reason that this tradition continues in the Kal Bhairav temple in Ujjain as well as in Varanasi.
Very true.
Thank you for answering that, ma'am. Uh, my next question is to Sumedha, ma'am. So, can you tell us if there were different modes of alcohol production and consumption in the Mauryan period? Did the production
Sorry,
itself,
Snigdha, you're not audible. Sorry, Snigdha, I can't hear you. There were rules. What did you say?
can you tell us if there were different modes of alcohol production and consumption in the Mauryan period? Like, did the production and the sale of alcohol differ in the countryside and the military people?
No, 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 not at all. There was the mode of production was the same. The kind of things that they used to make that alcohol, that differed according to the local things that were present. But remember that there was a great control of this whole area of alcohol production. There were very, very strong rules controlling these panagars and controlling these ganika shalas. And those strong rules were because they got a lot of money from this. So wherever it was produced, now again, it was a state monopoly. So when there is a state monopoly, the ways of producing it, how much you produce, you will get from how much raw material, everything was fixed, and how much you will pay as fee and pay as duty, that was also fixed. And the person who was the suradhyak, she had to do all this stuff. So the variation, if any, would only be in the local raw materials which were used to make the different suras and the different arishtas and asavs, etc. But it is also true that in the cities, perhaps the import of wines was much more popular. They were not imported in the villages. In the urban centers such as Patliputra or Ujjain or Mathura, or these places, the bigger ones and the medium ones, there was import, like I said, from Afghanistan. So that would be one of the differences. Then again, the richer people use more expensive spices. They use more expensive material to for fermentation, for spicing. So that would be the difference. But the drinking houses, the ale houses or the panagars were there across the board in urban centers as well as in the villages, and they were also standardized. Remember, this was a state monopoly, so they were also standardized. So the differences would be very little simply because of the state monopoly.
Thank you for answering that, ma'am.
And I think
My
sorry to interrupt, I think
yes.
this continued in the Gupta period also, because you do have a presence of a lot of ale houses or taverns with the flag, on top of them, much. And I think the Guptas continued what the Mauryans had started, actually, the state monopoly. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. My final question is to Rishiraj sir. An area that we did not touch upon is the use of alcohol in tantric rituals and dark arts. Can you tell us a little about that?
as uh, the discussion itself helped it crop up the question of tantrism, and I was about to mention that point about how in Varanasi, the city of Shiva, the Adi Dev, the Pashupati, and it was worshipped as the Vairava or the Nagar, Kotwal, as you said. See, so that's definitely a very legit point, and I was about to mention that and talk and bring in this connection with tantrism. In Mahanirvana Tantra, alcohol is called Tara. Very interesting. In Mahanirvana Tantra, alcohol is called Tara, the mother goddess herself in liquid form. I'm a James Joyce scholar. It makes me wonder how this femininity and the idea of the feminine as the liquid without being bound, the concept of being bound within a form, not formed but formless, Tara, the mother goddess, as a liquid in liquid form. the savior of beings, the mother of enjoyment and liberation, not contained but liberated in liquid form. Mortals who drink wine with their minds well under control are immortals on earth and become like Shiva himself. So that's a part of Mahanirvana Tantra. Tantra was open to all castes and included women in its rituals. There were no restrictions on eating with outcasts or taking food from them. A, a Chandala versed in the knowledge of Tantric doctrine excels a Brahmin, and the Brahmin who is wanting in such knowledge is beneath even a Chandala. So you see how this binary, which I perhaps my talk perhaps suggested, it's kind of diluted in this discussion of tantrism here, that brings in the question of how in tantric ritual alcohol and meat are consumed as sacraments, and how drinking alcohol symbolizes an intoxication of duality. Eating meat, the transmutation of death into deathlessness, since meat is a literal corpse, So this tantric alchemy, it's a kind of alchemy perhaps. Tantric alchemy involves the transformation of these poisons, and the five M's that Harini was mentioning was I found out in the notes, is madhya, yes, mamsa, meat; matsya, fish; mudra, the parched or fried grain; and maithuna, the sexual coupling. Yeah, so that's more or less.
Thank you, sir. I was wondering if Sumedha ma'am wants to add something to that.
No, actually, there is so much to say, but I don't know what exactly I can add in general. If there's something you want to ask about, go ahead. I'll talk about it.
No, then like it's fine.
Okay.
So, okay, thank you, sir. With that, we come to an end to tonight's discussion. I thank our panelists for sharing their knowledge and valuable insights with us. It was a treat listening to you all today, and it was certainly a very interesting discussion. Thank you once again for joining this evening, and a very good night.
Namaste. Thank you, Snigdha. Thank you,
Thank you
Rishiraj
so
and
much.
Harini.